What's going on, gamers? I am Merkaba18, and today we are bringing you our 1.0 guide to the Engineer. This is probably my second favorite class and has one of the best classes, subclasses in the entire game. So let's talk about the Engineer. We talked about the Scout and the Gunner already. We have video guides up there on the channel for those two already. I'll link to them at the end of this video. But where the Scout and the Engineer or the Gunner are essentially opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of speed and survivability, the Engineer is going to be somewhere in the middle. So they're not going to have as much health as the Gunner, but they are going to have more health than the Scout to start with. They're not going to have as necessarily as high a crit chance or damage as either of them, but they're going to have decent amounts. And where this class is going to really shine is in the utility and the ability to level faster. So the Engineer is all about utility, all about using various different techniques to essentially take advantage of different elements on the map. So let's talk about each of the subclasses. The Engineer, like I said, is somewhere in the middle in terms of health and speed, in terms of armor, in terms of mining speed. They are going to be quite a bit slower than the Driller and the Scout, I believe, but they are a little bit faster than the Gunner. So you're going to want to focus a lot on some mining speed and a little bit on some movement speed in terms of global upgrades. You're going to definitely want to focus on a little bit of health and, to a lesser degree, a little bit of armor. So there are three subclasses, as you can see here. There's the Maintenance Worker, the Tinkerer, and the Demolitionist. Let's dive into some basics for these. We're going to dive into some higher stat priority, complicated, advanced tips, some of the strengths and weaknesses of this class, and where you are going to work on some of your gear. So primarily in terms of elements, we're going to be dealing with plasma a lot here. We're going to be dealing a lot with electric. And a lot with kinetic damage. Primarily, a lot of their guns start or become plasma. They start kinetic or become plasma on some level. A lot of them are also going to start with electric. And those are sort of the elements that you're going to want to work on. Now, the Maintenance Worker, as you can see here, is primarily going to be using construct weapons like turrets. Those could also include things like Viper drones, cold drones. They can have fire sentinel drones that sit on the ground. The Maintenance Worker starts with the LMG platform, which is a sort of mid-tier weapon. I don't think it's one of my favorites. The primary benefit here is the bounce from the plasma projectiles that you eventually get, or from the electric that you can turn them into. It's not the worst weapon in the game to start with. It's not the best. It's somewhere in the middle. And you can make it a pretty solid weapon, and you can build pretty heavily around some of the constructs that this character gets with. Also, because of that, you're going to gain damage if it's tagged with. And let me explain basically how that works. If it's tagged with a construct tag, each weapon, when you open the menu, is going to have different tags on it. Light, medium, heavy weapon, beam weapon, lifetime. There's going to be a number of different tags for each weapon. In the menu, right below at the bottom of the weapon, you'll see different tags. If a weapon is tagged with construct, you're going to gain reload and damage automatically, which is a huge advantage. So you're going to want to focus on things like drones and LMG, the gun platform, automatically gets that. But you're also going to see things like the Krakoa Sentinel drones, which are the fire ones. You can kind of see what I'm talking about with that right here. This one's tagged with construct, turrets, lastic, and projectile. So you're going to want to focus on anything that has construct as a tag here. Primarily fire rate and reload speed are going to be main concerns here, and then damage, and then to a lesser degree, status effect, damage, and potency. One of the more complicated stat lines that you're going to want to focus on here is XP gained, because a lot of the XP gained here is going to help you get your levels faster, and we'll talk about more of this in the next subclass. But basically, one of the advantages of the Engineer is that they level much, much faster. So you're going to want to capitalize on that a little bit, particularly in stages 1 and 2. The earlier that you can get that, the better. Lifetime is very important here because these LMGs have a certain amount of time that they exist on the map. So you're going to want to focus on having as much lifetime as you can so that they stay down longer. And then reload speed is going to be part of the benefit here because their reload speeds are going to be very slow. So if they last longer and you're able to then reload and put them back down on the field faster, there's going to be little downtime, which means your damage is going to be affected less by not having them on the field. So that's why I would say reload speed and fire rate, and then lifetime, and then damage, because all of those other effects are going to have a better impact on the damage overall than the damage itself, which can be boosted through more global upgrades. So when it comes to weapon levels, choose those stats first, and then do global upgrades like status effect damage or damage to all weapons as a way of increasing and capitalizing on that. As you can see here, with this particular subclass's mastery, you gain some extra XP and you gain lifetime. As the weapon masteries, you can also see down here, damage and reload speed is going to help just a little bit there. All right, so Tinkerer actually happens to be probably my second favorite overall class in the entire game. This one is super, super fun. Now, it starts with a weapon that can be very difficult to build around until you do one thing, which we'll talk about here in just a second. The Tinkerer is going to gain even more XP. So the class basically starts with a bonus to the XP. You're going to get some from the mastery, and then you're going to get some from the subclass. So I think starting out, if you add it all up, it's like plus 28% on the XP gained. And if you look at the other part here, this is crucial. So you're gaining a lot of extra XP, and you're going to start at level 3 for all weapons when you pick them. Now, you start with the Warthog, which can be a little bit of a difficult one to build around because it shoots only forward. Now, it does have a knockback built into the weapon, and it shoots in the direction that you're moving. So it's only going to shoot forward at first. Now, fire rate is the key to this particular weapon, especially if you go down one of two paths, which I will talk about here in just a second. It starts as a kinetic weapon, and it has a under 1 second reload speed. And if you've watched my other guides or watched my live streams, you'll know reload speed being under 1 means you can focus on other stats. If it's higher than 1, you want to bring that down as close to 1 as you can. This one starts at 0.9, I think. And so the reload speed is pretty much set where you want it to be right out of the gates. Fire rate becomes the top priority, and then damage as a secondary priority. So what you can do with this particular weapon is choose either plasma or electric as a status effect. You probably are almost always going to want to choose plasma, because what that essentially does is every time it shoots, it bounces the projectiles off the wall, and it becomes a very, very good crowd control gun. So all of the damage that it does bounces around and helps you to do additional damage. Electric is not a terrible choice here. It's just not, in my opinion, and based on my testing, as good as plasma with this particular weapon. So you can choose plasma as the top priority in the overclock, or you can choose electric, knowing that it's probably going to do decent to well, or at least better than the kinetic part, but it isn't going to bounce. And then your final overclock is going to end up being a choice between one that is very much almost always required, and then one that I would never recommend, pretty much. So the final choice is it's a projectile bounce that goes behind you as well as in front of you. So it shoots in front and behind at the same time. Almost always going to pick that one. In certain circumstances, you might salvage it if you're desperate for some additional stats somewhere else. But don't ever, really, in my opinion, especially if you go plasma or electric, choose the other one, which is that it shoots double the number of projectiles, but lowers the damage of each projectile. And the reason for that is when it shoots forward and backward with the plasma, you're essentially getting a double bonus with no effect to the damage or lowered damage effect. And so that is a sort of no-nonsense kind of pick. Always pick the front and back, and it's going to bounce all over the place. And that is also primarily why you're going to use fire rate, because the more that you can fire the projectiles, the more they're going to be bouncing before they expire. You're going to shoot another one. So the Warthog starts in a way that is very difficult to build around, but it eventually becomes a rock-solid piece of equipment here. Eventually, also, in this subclass, you're going to want to choose the shock fence. There's an access. I think the maintenance worker accesses this one as well. But with the Tinker, it's especially valuable because it will eventually pick up all of the XP on the board for you if you choose that overclock. The shock fence has a ton of overclocks. I'm going to do a very specific like weapon build setup video for that one that will include some additional details, or you can ask me during my live streams. But needless to say, anytime you can choose the shock fence, you're probably doing a good job, particularly if you can get the slowing effect, overclock, and the XP pickup effect. But there's some other ways that you can build around it that become a little bit more complicated that I will do an advanced tips video on as well. You're going to want to really focus on reload speed on that shock fence. And then from there, you can choose just about any kind of plasma or electric weapon as your second or third and fourth weapons. And with all of that extra XP gained and with the pickup radius bonus, what essentially happens is almost all of the XP on the board becomes accessible just by moving around. And that is why the Tinkerer becomes one of the best classes in the entire game. Also, point of interest here, with the shock fence, with the pickup radius, it also increases the amount of range that those turret drops will pick up XP. So pickup radius becomes a good global stat for the Tinkerer and for the Engineer as a broader thing. It's also a good stat for everybody, but it's even more so for the Engineer because it extends that pickup radius to the shock fences. Now, my least favorite and probably one of the harder ones to build around is the Demolitionist. This one is more grenade and explosive oriented. The Deep Core we can talk about here in just a minute, but basically they gain a bonus to explosion radius and reload speed. You're going to want to use a lot of grenades here in this particular case. It starts with the Deep Core with a very low reload speed, so you're going to want to bring that reload speed down. It also, you're going to want to increase the explosion radius. This one becomes a complicated class in some degree because you're going to take a lot of your explosions and make them bigger and split them into smaller ones. So there's a way in which each grenade and the Deep Core can become a 3-shot for the price of 1. You can split it into 3 grenades for a lesser damage, but then bring that damage back up through global choices like explosion damage, so that you're getting, every time you fire it, you're shooting 3 of them for about the same amount of damage, then reloading, and they're firing before the other one explodes. That's the goal here. Almost all of your grenades you're going to want to split into 3 because eventually that benefit becomes greater than the cost of splitting them. Reload speed becomes so important, so especially with these grenades. It's important for every weapon, but in the Demolitionist subclass, it is the prime concern because with grenades, less so with the Deep Core, but with grenades, the explosion and the direction that they go and where they explode becomes very intermittent and unpredictable to some degree. So what you want is for you to be able to throw 1 or 2 of the grenades before they even explode so that where they land doesn't end up being a concern. That also is part of the reason you're going to split them into 3 because it spreads the damage out and increases how far they explode before you can even worry about where it lands. This is particularly the case with the high explosive grenade. So you want to be able to throw them as fast as possible to avoid the RNG element as to where they actually land and explode. The Demolitionist, also one minor concern that I will mention is that you're going to have a little bit of a hard time sometimes seeing the difference between your explosions and where the enemies are. It can kind of flood the screen a little bit. So if you are seeing that as a problem, make sure to turn down the effects in the graphic settings so that you can actually see and make sure you manage a little bit better your movement and see where the enemies are, where their projectiles are landing, stuff like that. Particularly on Hazard 5, that becomes a concern. In terms of strengths and weaknesses here, obviously this is sort of a middle-of-the-road class in terms of survivability, movement, and mining speed, so you're going to want to focus on some of that as a global stat. The main strength here is the XP pickup and its ability to utilize a variety of tools in a variety of different ways to maximize its chance of completing the run. Some of the best utility in the entire game, like the shock fences, like the ability to put turrets down on the ground and have them mine walls and stuff like that. Those are the kinds of things that you're going to have in the Engineer, and you want to make sure that you're capitalizing on those at all times. There's quite a bit of diversity among the builds here as well, so there's a lot of different ways that you can make the Demolitionist or the Tinkerer or the Maintenance Worker work for you. So the diversity is really strong with this class. As a result of that, however, there is a little bit of a limited access to like cold or freeze or to control. And as a result of that, if you're not mining fast enough, you're going to run into a situation sometimes where you can get trapped. Be very careful not to get trapped and cut off from your own damage. Some of the damage, if you don't get the right choices, like for example, if you don't end up with the plasma bounce or the electric choice on the Warthog, it can be really, really difficult to get that build up and running, and you may need to restart as a result of that. In terms of damage, you're going to want to capitalize on plasma or electric damage. You're going to want to work on reload speed, XP gained. Mining speed is always a helpful thing in there. Any kind of health regen or health maximization and armor are going to be helpful. Those are the kind of gear pieces that I'm looking for on the Engineer. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed these guides. Let me know if there's any questions that I have not answered as part of these 1.0 guides down below, and I will try to answer each of them as I go. The final class build guide is going to be for the Driller, which happens to be one of my favorites and probably my favorite subclass as well. I will also be putting out build guides for weapons and like a tier list for weapons. I will be doing overclock priority build guide, and we'll be touching a lot on a artifact build guide, which will kind of help you see where artifacts are going to be in terms of tier list and how you might choose them and utilize them effectively. Make sure to hit the sub button on the way out. Check out the other videos, and thank you for watching. See you again next time.